Okay, so this very first problem is question 2016, question number 3. It's an international test. It says a large retail company has 500 stores in the US and 300 stores in Europe. The average number of employees per store is 200 for a total of 100,000 employees in the US and 60,000 in Europe. The company is considering offering employees one of two new benefits: one additional day of paid vacation per year, or a small salary increase, a small increase in pay. The survey will be given to a sample of employees to investigate which benefit is preferred and whether there's a difference in the preference between employees in the US and employees in Europe. 2 sampling methods have been proposed. Sampling method 1, the company will randomly select 8 stores from its 800 stores. All employees at the selected 8 stores will be asked which benefit they prefer. So we're going to have a group of 8 stores, and we're going to survey all. So we have 8 stores, and we're going to survey all employees. I know right away this is a cluster sample. Sampling method 2, the company will select 1,000 employees from a list of all employees at the United States stores and 600 from a list of all employees at the European stores. So we've broken it in 2 groups, and we're going to survey from each group, breaking it into groups based on a common characteristic, based on being in the US or based on being in Europe. This tells me that this right here is stratified. All right, so part A. Identify one of the 2 methods resulted in a stratified sample of employees and the other resulted in a cluster sample of employees. Identify the sampling method that results in a stratified sample of employees and identify the strata. All right, well, that's easy. Sampling method method 2 is the stratified. That's what we said. And our strata are the 2 locations, Europe and the US. All right. Or you could say US employees and European employees, but those are your 2 strata. All right. And by the way, part 2 of that, identify the sampling method that results in a cluster of employees and identify the clusters. Well, method 1 was the cluster, and the 800 stores, or the employees within those 800 stores, are the clusters, because we're randomly selecting 8, and this will be a cluster sample. Now, the part in yellow was not required, but I just wanted you to be able to explain it. That's probably the part that took the longest on this. A stratified sample divides the population in 2 groups based on a single characteristic, and then randomly selects from within the strata. In this case, the company divided it into 2 groups, US or Europe, and the company randomly selected from both strata. Not required, but I asked you to do it. On the cluster, a cluster sample randomly selects a group or groups and then performs a census by surveying everyone in the group. Sampling method 1 selects 8 stores or groups and then surveys all the employees in those 8 groups. Give a statistical advantage and 1 statistical disadvantage of using sampling method 1. Once a cluster is selected, because we're using sampling method 1 and we've already said it's a cluster sample, we conduct a census. In this case, once we randomly select the 8 stores, we will survey all employees. As a result, as statistical advantages, we are assured that we represent every type of employee at the store, whether they may be custodians, executives, sales personnel, etc. So that's the statistical advantages. We're going to survey, make sure that we have every type of employee. Disadvantage: because clusters are selected randomly, it's plausible that either the US store or US store employees or European stores would not be represented. If the US employees and European have different opinions about pay and vacation, then selecting US or European employees would be a problem, right? So if we have a difference between the countries or nations, then we have a problem. So that would be part B. Part C, Explain a statistical advantage of using sampling method 2. Well, sampling method 2 is the stratified rather than using a simple random sample. Please remember, in a simple random sample, we're going to put all the employees' names in the hat and draw. Well, the advantage of a stratified, with the stratified, we are assured of having proportional representation of both the US and European. With a simple random sample, it's possible that we'd get too many employees from either location and underrepresent the other. You could have said it's possible that we'd get only US employees or only European and not represent, and that would be fine as well. And that would be part C. I added part D. And part D is basically just restating what we just said, given the statistical disadvantage of sampling method 2. Well, does the Stratify have a statistical disadvantage compared to method 1? So is there a disadvantage for using the stratified over the cluster? And the disadvantage would be with a cluster sample, we are assured to represent all employee types. But with a stratified, we very well may miss employee types, although we'll represent both countries or both nations. Okay, I'm going to put this on pause for just a moment so I can ask questions, and so it won't be recording. On part B, we had a really good question come up. It says, give one statistical advantage and one disadvantage of using sampling method 1. And could we say, and the question was, could we say no bias is an advantage? The cluster sample and the stratified sample, neither one of them are biased, all right? There's not a systemic problem with it. By random chance alone, the cluster might overrepresent, might not have US or might not have European employees, but it doesn't create bias in and of itself. That would be due to sampling error. And the same with the stratifying. Stratification. With stratification, we may not get all employee types, but it's due to random chance alone. So it's due to sampling variability, not to bias. Bias is we have a bad study design, and as a result of that bad study design, we overrepresent or underrepresent. Cluster and stratified are not biased designs. It's just they have different strengths and weaknesses, and sampling error will impact them slightly different. I have one other question I need to take a moment at.